So Max Lowe is joining me. He is a photographer, filmmaker, and director of Bare Existence, which was a jury finalist of the festival's Eric Moe Award for Best Short. And Max, thanks for your time. Obviously, we were supposed to do this back in the spring in March in person, but it is good to connect virtually. So yeah, thanks again for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Wish we could be together in person in front of a
Absolutely.
big old audience of folks, but this is the second best thing.
Well, and before we talk about the film, I know you've had you co-directed a film that our audience I know will remember from a couple years ago, Sky Migrations. And before we talk about Bare Existence, I did want you to talk a little bit about your film background. You've worked on many films in different capacities: camera work, directing, producing. So start us off just by talking about your background in filmmaking.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty well rooted in still photography. That's kind of how I came into the storytelling world in the first part. Still photography was a passion and something that I, did for myself throughout high school and into college. Stepping towards a career as a creative came as a part of my still photography work, and wanting to, take that and make it more of a career. And I think, the first films that I made were probably just things that I shot on my old Nikon D80 that had recently been equipped with the ability to shoot HD video, which was pretty cool back in the day. Not much to shake a stick at these days, but yeah, I mean, it kind of just came naturally that I would take this medium that I was already working in and just kind of like take what I knew as far as frame composition and the stories that I was trying to tell with my still photography, and bring video into that. And yeah, I mean, it was kind of just like saying yes, and even though I didn't know anything about filmmaking, just like when the opportunity arose, just being like, yep, I can make films. So yeah, I started working a bunch with National Geographic Adventure. I got a Young Explorers grant in 2012 that took me to Nepal and introed me into that world. And from there, I started doing episodic short video stuff, and that kind of led to more documentary style stuff, journalistic, story-driven film work. And yeah, I mean, I think Sky Migrations was one of the first docs that I made that really had a big splash, and went on to screen at a bunch of different festivals and had a pretty broad impact on a wide audience of folks, which was super cool. But yeah, since then I've gone on to direct and shoot a handful of other short docs, including Bare Existence and Adventure Not War, both of which won some accolades. And yeah, just this year wrapped up my first feature documentary film project.
And we're looking forward to that. And so turning kind of to Bare Existence, how did you find the story for that? So kind of what took you to Canada to follow Polar Bears International up there?
Yeah, I mean, most of the storytelling that I've done has all been like personal connections. And whether it was Sky Migrations and Charles's connection with Hawkwatch International that gave us the access to that story, or Adventure Not War, just meeting Stacey Bear and like starting to have a conversation about this trip that he wanted to do. So it's not like I am sitting in my office and just writing down ideas and sketching them out on a wall or something and then executing on them. They like kind of come forth through experiences and connections that I'm having as I operate, just in life in general and my work. And that the story behind Bare Existence is no different. Friends with several of the people who work at Polar Bears International here in Bozeman. They're based in Bozeman. So I've known about their work for a long time, and having been inspired by other films like Chasing Coral and some of these amazing environmental films that tie a human narrative in with the narrative of the natural world, wild animals and wild places. That was something that really attracted me, because I feel like my strong suit is in those more human-driven stories. So taking that template and putting it to the work that Polar Bears International is doing up in the Canadian Arctic was kind of the plan as I pitched it. And that's the guidelines that we used to execute on.
Well, and yeah, picking up on that human narrative, Steve's just incredibly inspiring, devoting his life to polar bear research. What was kind of your overall kind of takeaway after spending time with him, as well as his team too? I mean, you followed Journey, who's intern, also Alyssa, who works with their educational outreach. So yeah, talk about your overall kind of takeaways, kind of being embedded with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that my experience working on Bear Existence and working with all the characters that we featured, including Steve, it just, and this is something that I've seen in all my storytelling. You meet these people who have just dedicated themselves to doing something that outside of their experiences would seem almost unattainable or impossible to anyone else. Like, you don't, like, who would ever imagine as like a kid, or even, an adult for that matter, like becoming a polar bear scientist and chasing down polar bears in the wild and darting them and and putting collars on them. And it's just something that is like so far out of your average individual's like reach or understanding of possibility, that like actually meeting people like this and seeing the paths that they took in life, and it is just like following your passion for the most part, and believing that you can. Coming back to my experience coming up as a filmmaker, like, you don't think about whether or not you should be the person stepping up to try and take these roles or do these different things. You just like see them as possible and thus make them happen. And I think that is largely Steve's story. He loved bears as a kid, and he went and studied ecology and biology, and then just went and made it happen. And that's an inspirational story, no matter how you cut it or what world you put that character in. But he's definitely that character in the polar bear realm, for sure. In Journey's story, we really wanted to just ground the film in reality, and the reality that people who live in Churchill and in the far north that have to deal with polar bears wandering around their backyards, like, deal with. We have this scene where she's talking about, going to volleyball practice and her friends running into polar bears and having to, run away, which you're not supposed to do, but you can't blame her. And she is this kind of quintessential high school student in her personality that could live anywhere in the world. She's just trying to figure out her life and what she wants to do, and she's going to pursue a volleyball scholarship somewhere else in Canada, and she saw working with PBI as a good opportunity to expand her horizons like any young person. She hadn't really found her passion yet, like Steve is an example of at the other end, but she's like an example of a young person who can, if you engage, end up in these situations and with these opportunities that can lead you into extraordinary veins in life and take you down roads that you never thought you might venture.
So yeah, and I also in kind of turning to Alyssa and what they're doing with educational outreach.
As a scientist, you can work your entire life at writing papers and dissertations and books and whatever else um, on whatever your area of study might be. But if you're not getting that information out in a receivable manner to a huge swath of the public, like it is kind of a moot point. And Polar Bears International has definitely recognized that fact and put a lot of their resources into making sure that they're, telling these stories to the people that matter, being the next generation of children that are going to grow up and have to be faced with these decisions and repercussions that all of us have made in the last however long we've been alive. And those kids that are in grade school now, they're going to be the ones who will see the last polar bears die if nothing happens. And so, making sure that that message gets out to as many of the kids that Polar Bears International can reach, but then also a broader public that in the end is going to be able to absorb that emotional storytelling and factor that into going to the polls and voting. It's just one little grain of sand in the jar, so to speak, alongside a whole echelon of other issues, but it's every drop counts. So.
Well, and also, Max, I wanted to go back to kind of the shoot itself, and I was thinking about the landscape, and the opening of the film, Alyssa is talking about how it looks like the moon, and you capture it through great images on the screen. What were your first impressions when you got up there for the first time, and what was it like seeing kind of the sea ice situation firsthand as well up there?
Sure. Yeah, we arrived like late October, early November, and just leaving the airport in Winnipeg, you getting on the plane, it's like no other plane that you've ever been on before. It's a 737 or something like that, but half of it is partitioned for cargo because there's only so many flights that go all the way up that far north. So you're sitting in this plane that's like got a huge cargo bay in the front because it's going to multiple different communities on its journey north, dropping off all sorts of different stuff that they need up there. While we were there, actually, the railroad had just reopened, which is usually like to Churchill. The railroad ends at Churchill, but that's how most everyone gets everything they need up there, from groceries to cars to furniture and whatever else. So yeah, I mean, just getting on the plane, you definitely see a different world from the get-go, and then flying in, obviously it's just this frozen tundra like you imagine in the movies, and it's cold immediately. You get out on the tarmac and the wind is blowing and it's snowing. When we arrived in Churchill, the sea ice hadn't formed yet, so we got to see the open ocean, and then we actually saw that transition in the 8-9 days that we were there. I think our last day, the first bit of sea ice had formed. Probably not enough to support the bears, but it was getting there. And that's an integral part of the story. So we were really lucky to see that, part of that whole issue, and the thing that faces the bears is the formation of sea ice, and the fact that it used to form up like early October, and now it's not forming up till early November, and that date is moving back even further as the years go by. The bears are starving as they wait. So yeah, it was crazy to go and step into this environment that I had imagined and heard stories about my entire life. get to go and put that on the screen via our work. It was pretty remarkable.
Well, and Max, before we wrap up, any overall thoughts about the project? Anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's wild to think back. We filmed this 2 years ago, almost to the date. We left to go up to Churchill 2 years ago, right about now, end of October. And it's crazy to see the impacts of climate change that we have all seen, whether you live in California and you're affected by the fires, or down in the southeast and you're impacted by hurricanes and flooding. This stuff is real, and we need to face that reality and bring that truth back to the center of all of our shared understanding. The story of the polar bears is an emotional one. It's a sad one. Steve likes to call them big white hairy canaries in the coal mine. But they're just the first to be impacted. I mean, the polar regions are more sensitive to warming, but this is something that we're all going to have to deal with on a personal level at some point or another. And yeah, we need to go vote like our lives depend on it, because they do.